The ocean is nothing if not absolutely stuffed with the unexpected. For example, if I were to describe some of the prettiest fish on the coral reef, like yellow tangs, you might be a little blindsided when you learn that they had venomous spines on their backs and blades on their tails they used to defend themselves against predators. Meanwhile, if I were to describe an animal with 20-foot wide wings, a giant mouth of doom, and devil horns growing out of its face, you'd probably think I'm talking about a vampire, or a dragon, or Satan himself. But I'm actually talking about one of the gentlest giants in the ocean blue, manta rays. Before we go on, we should probably get on the same page about what mantas are. Mantas belong to a suborder of animals called rays, which are pretty easily recognized for having flat bodies that make them look like pancakes with eyeballs. Now, you might think I'm nuts for telling you that rays are close cousins of sharks, but their relationship becomes a bit easier to understand when you look at their skeletons. Like sharks, all rays are cartilaginous, which means their bones are made of the same bendy, weird stuff that's in your ears that gives it structure. Being as floppy as a banana peel isn't the best move for an animal that needs to support its weight on land, but animals in the ocean can grow much larger without sacrificing their agility if their bones are soft. Okay, so we get it. Rays are related to sharks, but we'd still never get the two mixed up, right? Well, not necessarily. Rays and sharks are both very diverse groups of animals, with some members seeming to blur the line between the two suborders. For example, guitarfish are rays with the long, sinewy tails of sharks, while angel sharks have the flat pancake bodies usually reserved for rays. But if anything in this world is certain, it's death, taxes, and gill positioning. Even the sharkiest rays have gill slits on the bottom of their bodies, and even the flattest sharks have gill slits on the sides of their heads. And mantas have gills on the bottom, throwing them definitively in the ray camp. Now, like I said, mantas may look like sea demons, and early sailors used to call them and their relatives devilfish because of their unsettling appearance, but they don't have a mean bone in their bodies. Well, technically they barely have any bones at all, but my point still stands. While rays are generally far less predatory than sharks, most of them do have some kind of defense mechanism they use to defend themselves against predators. Skates and thornback rays have rough scales in their backs, and torpedo rays produce electric shocks, and stingrays, including the eagle rays that mantas are closely related to, have venomous spines on their tails. Mantas have a more pacifistic approach to survival, relying on sheer size and speed to deter any potential predators. And to them, size really does matter. There are two known species of manta rays. There's the reef manta, which can grow to be about 15 feet across and almost 3,000 pounds, and the aptly named oceanic giant manta, which can be over 20 feet across and weigh about 4,000 pounds. Both species are so large that only the biggest, baddest sharks and killer whales would even consider trying to eat one. Even when they are injured by a predator, mantas can usually rely on the slimy mucus they're covered with to sterilize and help heal their wounds. Now, you might expect such a large animal to have a similarly large appetite, and you'd be right. Sort of. While most rays prefer to eat shellfish and other animals they find buried in the sand, mantas are filter-feeding planktivores. This means, despite being freaking enormous, mantas eat the smallest animals in the ocean, zooplankton. Now I know that sounds like a typo, but lots of the largest animals in the ocean, like whales and whale sharks, sustain themselves on nothing more than plankton and small fish suspended in the water column. They just have to eat a lot of those tiny animals, and mantas are designed to be extremely good at that. Their gigantic, scary mouths are used as nets that scoop up as much water and zooplankton as possible. Those demonic-looking horns in their faces are actually very dexterous cephalic fins, and they're unfurled to better channel food-filled water into those enormous net-like mouths. But they can't just swallow 100 gallons of seawater, because that would be gross, so they use special rakers on their gills to filter any zooplankton out of the water, and then they spit it back out. Once they've sifted a nice mouthful of plankton out of the water like the giant pasta strainers they are, they can finally swallow it. It's kind of like if you put an entire bowl of cereal into your mouth, squared all the milk out of your nose, and then ate it. Which I don't recommend you try at home because we're not designed to eat that way. Meanwhile, mantas are only designed to eat that way. They can't really swallow anything larger than an anchovy because their throats are only a couple of centimeters wide. If, by some perverse miracle, you managed to get stuck in a manta's mouth, it would probably be more traumatizing for the manta than it would be for you. I mean, it's hard to eat a watermelon when you're used to eating Rice Krispies. Now, that may not sound very exciting compared to the hunting strategies used by sharks, but it's one of the coolest phenomena to see in the natural world. See, the plankton that mantas like to eat gather in the water column at night, which means that mantas are largely nocturnal hunters by necessity. So every night, mantas gather and work together to herd these plankton into dense groups that they can easily scoop up. This teamwork has an otherworldly, ballet kind of appearance, and they'll even go for plankton swarms that gather in front of the lights of divers, which is actually really clever. And clever is a surprisingly good word to use for these guys. They're very social animals, so they'll even have best friends they prefer to hang out with. They can recognize each other by smell and by using identifying features, such as the unique splotches that each manta has on the underside. In fact, studies with mirrors have indicated that mantas can recognize their own reflection, which is a level of self-awareness rarely seen in fish. Unfortunately, it's not all friendship and dancing in the world of mantas. As humans dump more plastic and other pollutants into the ocean, mantas become poison more often when they try to filter feed. Some industries will fish for mantas so that their gills can be turned into Chinese medicine, but they're more often caught as bycatch. This means that when fishermen use large nets to try to catch industry fish, like tuna, they'll often accidentally entangle and kill mantas who happen to just be there at the wrong time. Another problem is something called ghost fishing, where fishermen will dump broken nets overboard and these discarded nets will needlessly strangle anything they happen to float into. And on top of that, the havoc that we're playing on coral reefs with habitat destruction, pollution, and climate change is killing the plankton that mantas feed on, which essentially starves them out. Because of a combination of all these factors, worldwide manta populations are becoming vulnerable to extinction. This isn't to say the situation is hopeless, though. Both species of mantas are protected in international waters, and more countries are outlawing the enormous trawl nets and ghost nets that kill them. Coastal nations in the tropics are realizing that people all over the world want to dive with mantas, and making a serious effort in order to preserve them. And on top of that, we can all work together to reduce the plastic and other harmful chemicals we pollute the ocean with. And hopefully, as more people become aware of these problems, we can also get better at addressing the pollutants and climatic shifts that threaten their habitat too. These bizarre rays are so large, intelligent, and playful, and the ocean just wouldn't be the same without them. Hopefully we'll be able to conserve them, and the oceans will remain that much more fantastic. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Marine Talks. I hope you've learned a thing or two about manta rays and understand why we really ought to keep them around. Let us know if there's a topic you're curious about, and I'll see what I can hustle up. I'll catch you next time.